Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this week on Have You Heard? Armor Animal Health's video series. This week, we're going to be talking about heat stress and electrolytes in our dairy and beef cattle. My name is Valerie Free, and I am an inside sales representative for Armor Animal Health. I have been with Armor for 2 years, and I primarily handle customers in our Midwest territory. With warm weather on the rise, we need to begin our preparation for how to deal with heat stress in our cattle. This past week, we reached temperatures of nearly 90 degrees here in Wisconsin, with high humidity as well, making the actual temperature even higher than this. What is the weather like in your area today? Use the comments section below and let me know where you're watching from and what the weather is like. In the past weeks, we have had viewers that join us from Mexico and Canada. I'm just going to take a moment and look at the comments to see where our viewers are joining us from. It looks like we've got Carly from Kiel, Wisconsin. We've got Gabby from Beaver Dam, Vicki from Almond, and Chelsea also from Beaver Dam. Thank you guys for joining us. We know your time is valuable, so I want to go ahead and start today's topic. Today, we have one of our professional service veterinarians, Dr. Larry Judge, joining us with Armor on today's call. He has been with Armor since 2012. He received his DMV from Michigan State University in 1987 and his PhD also from Michigan State in 2001. He also became a board-certified dairy specialist in 2010. Dr. Larry, we're so excited to have you here with us today. Please tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, hello. I grew up on a dairy farm in Michigan. That farm now is owned by my youngest brother and cousin. They currently are milking 430 cows and farm about 1,200 acres. I live myself 1 hour south of the family farm and in the Lansing, Michigan area, which is the capital of Michigan, also home of Michigan State University. I live with my wife, Jo Lynn, and 3 cats. Joe and I each have 2 children, and now we also have 2 grandchildren as well. I cover Michigan, the lower peninsula of Michigan, along with Ohio and Indiana for Armor Animal Health.
Thank you, Dr. Larry. Before you begin, I want to let our viewers know that if you have any questions throughout today's presentation, type them in the comments, and we'll be sure to get those all answered at the end of the presentation. We will even be giving away an Armor Animal Health sweatshirt to the best question, so ask away. If you're watching the recorded version, you are still welcome to post any questions, and we will certainly get back to you with an answer. Although many of our viewers may already be familiar with why they should focus on heat stress throughout the warm summer months, can you tell us a little bit more about what heat stress is, what it does for our cattle, and why we should care about this?
Sure. Heat stress causes at least a billion, that's billion with a B, in annual losses for the cattle industry in the United States. So how do cattle experience heat stress? Well, to cattle, it feels about 15 degrees hotter than it does to us humans. For example, while we may feel pretty comfortable at about 75 degrees, to a cow that really feels like about 70 or about 90. Cows begin to experience heat stress at temperatures when they get above 70. So fairly low that they have heat stress. And as I'm sure you understand, the humidity has a large influence on how hot it feels out. The combination of heat and humidity is called the temperature humidity index. So the higher the humidity levels mean a higher relative temperature that is experienced by cattle and people too. So various animals deal with heat differently. Some animals like humans and horses sweat, but cattle only can sweat very minimally. When moisture dries off your skin, it carries heat away. This is called evaporative cooling. Dogs use evaporative cooling by panting, but cattle mainly increase their respiratory rate greatly, which is kind of like panting to evaporative cool themselves. Cattle also tend to bunch or group up as a response to heat. This is a negative response and actually can make them hotter. My dad always said they do this because misery likes company. Reduced responses to heat stress in cattle that we observe tend to be reduced feed intake, which leads to decreased milk production in dairy, or less weight gains in growing animals, beef animals. Reduced reproductive function, such as reduced conception rates, and sometimes increased pregnancy losses also can occur. In terms of the economic losses that we see from heat stress, the decreased feed intake leads to that decreased milk production and less weight gains. And the reduced reproductive function leads to more breedings, fewer pregnancies, increased days open in dairy cows, and occasionally, in severe stress, more abortions.
Thank you, Dr. Larry. Those are all great reminders. So while we unfortunately can't change the weather, we can do some things to reduce the impact of heat stress. Can you talk a bit about some of the ways we can do this before it becomes a big problem on some of our operations?
Sure, some of the ways we can reduce heat stress in cattle are: number one, provide shade if cattle are in the sun. Um, this mainly applies to pastured animals. So you can do this by allowing pastured animals access to barns. Or if cattle are on a pasture that doesn't have trees and you have a pasture with trees, getting them into pasture that has trees for shade. If no trees are available at all in any of your pastures and cattle have to pasture, which is in the case of like organic dairies or beef cattle, you can at least park like a wagon or chopper box there to allow some shade for them there. Second most important thing is to provide lots of water, drinking water and cooling water too. By cooling water, I mean water that's either misted or sprayed on them. For the drinking water, make sure it's very available and it's very clean. I always say, ask yourself, would you drink that water yourself? That's how clean it should be. I would consider adding additional tanks to the tanks you already have in the summer to allow more space for cattle to drink freely. Consider adding soakers or misters, with soakers being more effective than misters. If you don't have those currently and you're a dairy farm or even a beef feedlot, you can use a hose to wet the backs of the cattle down, which really helps them eliminate heat and increase evaporative cooling. So number three, evaporative cooling is the main way we can assist cattle to get them to reduce stress from heat. Fans are very important. I see fans most days or on most dairies now. However, some farms only have them for milking cows and not dry cows or young stock, which also suffer heat stress as well. Make sure the fans are spaced properly. Proper spacing is about 10 times the diameter of the fan. Also, make sure the fans are working. I see quite a few fans that are broken and not running on farms, and a broken fan doesn't move any air. Also, you can reduce group sizes on your dairy farm, which decreases the amount of time they spend in the holding area, which is a primary place where they accumulate heat because they're packed tightly together and air can't move between them. Make sure you don't work cows or lock up cows during the hottest part of the day. That is for both dairy and beef cattle. And finally, there's some dietary adjustments that you can do to help reduce heat stress, such as increasing ration density of nutrients, energy, or mineral, and then providing electrolytes to the cows in their ration.
So there are a number of things a producer can do to reduce the effects of heat stress in their cattle. Many producers already do some of these things, such as the fans and the water, but what additional steps can they take, such as their dietary changes that you mentioned, and what exactly are some of these things?
Well, your nutritionist can be consulted and they can increase the energy density of your ration to account for that reduced feed intake that occurs when cattle are heat stressed. Increased non-ruminal energy such as bypass fats can be added if they're not already in the ration, because that's energy that doesn't produce additional heat but provides additional energy for the animal. The density amount of minerals can be adjusted in the ration too. The main ones are what we call the electrolytes, which are mainly three: sodium, potassium, and chloride, with potassium being the most important one to account for, because reduced intake and increased losses that occur during heat stress periods. Products such as bovine blue light can help provide these electrolytes, and other products are also available. Additionally, nutraceutical products such as pre or probiotics or binders can sometimes be used to help support gastrointestinal tract health during periods of altered feed intake due to heat stress. These products provide beneficial bacteria, promote GI tract health, and during these periods of altered feed intake. The binders can bind toxins that can reduce GI tract health and make immune function poor as well. And finally, adding additional buffer to the ration, such as bicarbonate, can help reduce the risk of rumen acidosis, which is something that can occur during periods of heat stress. This results from excessive drooling and increased respiratory rates that allow the cow to have become acidic from reduced rumination and saliva production. And also, we know acidosis can contribute to laminitis and cause sore feet in cows.
Very good. We do have a few tech bulletins that do discuss heat stress and go through some of the items that Dr. Larry did mention here today. If you're interested in receiving a copy of these tech bulletins, please feel free to mention it in the comments below or on the survey, which we posted at the end of the presentation. I also want to remind all of our viewers that if you have any questions, in the answer section will be added at the end of the live video today. So please don't feel like you need to wait until the end to ask your questions. Type them in the comments below and we'll get to them. Don't forget, we're giving away a free sweatshirt for the best question. Dr. Larry, we know that heat stress causes immediate reductions in milk production and weight loss, but what are some of the long-term impacts of heat stress on your cattle?
I think the biggest long-term loss from heat stress is due to decreased reproductive function. This results from reduced conception that we see during hot periods of heat, and also from increased early embryonic loss. With severe heat stress, we can also see late-term abortions, and that's with severe heat stress. As a result of these reproductive losses, we end up with less calves and fewer replacement animals. This can increase costs to the farm via animal purchases that are required to maintain the herd size. What we tend to see happen on farms with heat stress is a bunching up of calvings after the heat stress ends, because we get a lot of cows pregnant all at the same time once temperatures return to more normal levels. This can lead to problems for the farm by increasing problems in fresh cows due to overcrowding our fresh cow areas and calving areas. And finally, we know that with less energy intake during heat stress, that reduces immune function of our cattle. And we see increased susceptibility to disease, especially respiratory disease. This results from the reduced energy intake and increased energy expenditure that cattle suffer when trying to keep cool by increasing their respiratory rate. Also, when it's hot, we get less opportunity in response to vaccines that are given. We don't like to vaccinate when it's higher than about 85 degrees, because we see more vaccine reactions at temperatures that exceed 85. So while we get less response to vaccines given, we just don't have it. Sometimes we have to delay vaccines due to heat stress.
Sure. So based on the information you have presented, are there any other factors that producers should consider when looking at heat stress on their operations?
Well, we all know milk production and weight gains suffer. Milk production in dairy cattle, weight gains in young stock and beef cattle. And we know losses from heat occur very quickly. When we hit a hot period, we know cows go down in milk and cattle quit eating and quit gaining weight very quickly. But we also know that recovery tends to be much slower than the loss was. So therefore, if we can do anything to reduce the loss, that's going to accelerate recovery in milk production and weight gains once the hot weather subsides. Remember that duration of heat stress periods is important as well. So while cattle can handle a day or two of hot weather, especially if cooling at night occurs, such as temperatures get below 70 at night, that allows them to shed stored heat that's stored in the rumen fluid. But if it stays above 70 at night and that hot spell lasts for more than 3 days, we know that really contributes to great losses in production. So I think it's important that you proportion your heat abatement strategy to the duration of the stress.
Thank you for your insight on that, Dr. Larry. What would you recommend producers to do to deal with the hot weather we're likely ahead of us yet this summer?
Well, first, I would assess your current level of heat stress prevention or mitigation plan and determine what measures you currently have in place. And then think, how well has that worked in the past? So knowing what you know now, what additional measures could you take this year on your farm? Perhaps if you don't have fans, you could install some fans. If you have some fans in some areas, you could add fans in other areas. Perhaps add more water space by additional tanks. You could also install or add soakers or misters, with soakers being preferred, especially in the holding area for dairy cattle. And finally, you could do some dietary adjustments, such as increasing the energy density of the ration and or increase the mineral density of the diet, especially potassium. And this can be accomplished by adding products to the ration to provide additional minerals. And then those pre and probiotics or binders also are additional nutritional products that can be added to help improve GI health in cows during periods of heat stress and altered intake.
Thank you, Dr. Larry. That is all great information and some things that our operations could implement right away. Let me take a look and see what questions have come in from those that are watching live with us today, as I did see a few trickle in. We did have one question that came from Vicki Lauer, and she asked, what can I do to keep my stock tank water clean?
Well, that's a good question. Of course, dumping it is helpful. Also, locating it in a place where it's not as likely to get dirty can be helpful. Um, I have seen producers add goldfish to water tanks, which sounds crazy, I know, but they also will eat some of the product away, or they'll eat some of the feed that cattle dribble into the tank. Locating it away from feed areas is very important because they will tend to put feed into the water when they're eating. So great places to put it to keep it clean and increase intake are right at the exit of a milking parlor. Is a great place on a dairy farm to put a water tank.
Thank you. We did have one other question come in as well from Gabby Schumacher, and she asks, when experiencing heat exhaustion in our cattle, what are the steps that need to be taken in getting that calf or that cow back to where they need to be?
I think she probably means if maybe a particular animal is just really having a lot of heat stress, getting them cool right away. If they're in the sun, get them to shade. Getting them not real cold water, but just a lukewarm water on them to increase evaporative heat loss. Putting a fan on them after that too, and get them to cool down. And then monitor their temperature closely. If you're able to, a really great way, especially that's practical in a calf, to reduce their body temperature quick is to do some intravenous fluids. So if they're a producer that's capable of doing an intravenous injection on a calf, that's that cool fluid running in that will cool them very quickly as well.
Thank you. James Heyer asks, can you use too much water when using soakers?
It's possible. The important thing is that just the back and sides of the animal get wet, especially for a milking cow. Young stock, not quite as critical, but for milking cows, we really don't want that water to go on the udder of the cow because water there can carry bacteria to the teat end, and we know that can lead to mastitis. We don't want to get laying areas either, stalls wet. So the best place to have water is at the feed line, the feed bunk, and in the holding area.
Very good. Vicki Lauer asks, is there a particular binder that you would recommend?
Probably my favorite one is Omnigen AF, but most companies have one that they favor. There's several different types, from ones that are bentonite or clay based to ones that are more silicate based. I think the silicate based ones tend to be more effective, in my opinion, than the clay based or bentonite based. Bentonite based ones are much cheaper, but I don't think as effective. So I would say if I had to pick one, Omnigen would be my favorite, but there are other ones that other companies make that, especially if they're silicate based, that could be good.
Very good. Nikayla Peters asks, where I am located, the weather likes to bounce from being extremely hot to being extremely cold. Because of this, our cattle are more prone to different illnesses. How do I prevent heat exhaustion using the tips you provided without getting my cows sick from the weather when it just decides to drop unexpectedly?
Right. Yeah, we definitely, especially in calves, but even in cows, when we get big changes between daytime temp and nighttime temp, I'd say when we over 30, especially if it goes over 40-degree swing, which we don't normally see in the summer, But in the spring and fall, we can see, have warm days to 80 and cool days at night down to the 40s. And that's very stressful to the animal. So we have to, in most barns these days are curtained. So we have to raise curtains at night to try to reduce the impact of the cool air coming in, and then drop them in the day. And then turn fans on and off and water on and off too, so that we're not chilling cattle unnecessarily, but keeping them cool when it gets hot. But when we get to those, especially in the spring and fall, when temperatures are really changing a lot, it can be a challenge to have the right mitigation in place at the right time. It takes a lot of work and time.
James Heyer asks, what should I do during extreme heat for calving cows?
As far as I probably for dairy cows is what he's probably referring to, but it would apply to beef as well. But just keeping them cool before and after they calve. Fans are very important in the calving area. That's probably the best thing we can do. We don't really want soakers or misters in our calving area. It's not very practical, so that's going to get our bedding calving area pen very wet, and that would be detrimental. So having our calving area well fanned and well shaded are the most important things.
Very good. Vicki Lower asks, are there any health effects on calves born to heat stressed cows?
There can be, yes. I think a lot of the impact is on the cow herself, but anything that impacts the cow can potentially impact the calf's health as well. So when we have calves born to cows that are under heat stress, those calves are kind of already stressed, if you will, themselves too. And so taking just very special care of those calves, as we normally would, make sure we get a good level of colostrum in them. And then during periods of heat stress, oftentimes add some electrolytes between milk feedings to keep them well hydrated.
Very good. Before I ask our last question, I'm just gonna intake my water and decrease my heat stress going on here. It's a little warm in this room. I don't know about you, Dr. Larry.
I hear what you're saying. I think I will do the same.
Yes. Cheers to water.
Yes.
And our last question, it looks like here, is from Carly Blotto. And she asks, is pumping cows with heat stress a good idea?
I think if you have cows that are calving, especially older cows calving during periods of high heat stress, yes, definitely doing some drenching with an electrolyte product or whatever product you use on your farm. If you want advice on products, certainly we could give that to you. But yes, because we know those cows are at higher risk of having difficulties because they calve during a period of high heat stress. I think I've always thought through my career that older cows, especially calving during periods of high heat stress, that's even worse than a period of cold stress. And that we know that really tends to impact the health of those older cows quite greatly by just stressing them right from the beginning.
Thank you so much for your insight on that, Dr. Larry. It looks like that is all the questions that have filtered in. Let's share some closing remarks on any final tips that you might have.
Well, I think it's all shaping up to be a hot summer. I mean, we've had several 90 degrees days already, and we're not even out of June. Some years we go a whole summer with hardly having any 90-degree days, and we've already had several here in Michigan, and we have a couple more scheduled for next week before it turns July 1st. And July and August in this part of the United States, in the upper Midwest, are always our hottest months. So I'm expecting that trend to continue and it be a hot summer this year. Most heat mitigation investments have a positive return on investment. If you believe heat stress has been a problem on your operation, take some time now to determine where you are now, decide what additional steps you could do to improve the heat mitigation program on your farm. I think your cattle will thank you for this by responding with improved milk production for dairy cows and weight gains on beef.
We again want to thank you, Dr. Larry, for taking the time to be part of today's live event. We all hope that you learned some useful information that can be applied on your operation, and please feel free to share with your friends. This video has been recorded, so you can certainly go back and view it on our Facebook page or our YouTube channel. If you're watching the recorded version and have a question, you can ask in the comments and we'll get to those questions right away for you. Please complete the survey that will be posted in the comments to help us better serve you and provide any suggestions for our future Facebook Live events. Our winner will be selected to win a $100 Armor Animal Health card. Thank you again for watching, and we'll see you next Thursday on Have You Heard?